Yeah.
Just the tutas.
Yeah.
Or they were too small.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Salmar.
So welcome everybody. Just a sound check for folks at home. Everyone can hear me here, I think. And what about people at home? Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes, sir.
What about
Tashi Dele.
Tashi Dele from Geshe? Can everyone hear Geshe okay? Awesome. Okay, so let's get started.
Disare.
What is it?
Why Tachiru Kanga Tashi Dele Susane Kawayoga in Kanga Tami, they were to Kiwa Ponoshi.
So first of all, to all the Dharma friends, welcome, Tashi Dele, greetings, and wherever you are, wherever you may be, Geshe hopes that everything is going well and everything is happy.
The Taru so to see Loju Dunyolet Tash.
And also that your study and practice of the Dharma, of the teachings, are also going smoothly and well. And also our gathering together today is for the purpose, not just for ourselves, but also for others to be able to establish the causes of happiness and contentment. And also a lot of what the Dharma is about how we function in the outer world, being a kind person, being an ethical person, being somebody who connects well with others. And to be a kind person, a good person, to bring forth love and compassion into the world. Of course, this is not something that requires us to be Buddhist or to engage with the Dharma specifically.
다 전에 뭐야라 뭐니지도 담바 쇼바도 담바 치킬레난다 말레난다 가제 몸보스트네 다 여보시와이나 아니 뭐도 던로도 코유도 좀벌이 실다 패도 야치 모용이와레스
No matter how we do it, whether we are a believer in Buddhism or not, if we take these tools and we develop these qualities to become a good and compassionate person, what we'll find is that our connections with others improve, that on that basis there is more harmony in the world, that society, the environment, all of these things benefit from that.
다 대시지 이찬에 다 셔돌 할레비다 머실레 아니 좀벌이 실라 할레비 같이 모이자 다 근데 이나요 실라 마템비겠다네
And it's because, right, that the world is so complex and everybody has many different beliefs, that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, seeing that peace and happiness in the world is something very important, he talks about universal human values or ethics that are beyond religion. And, you know, that means that the tools to become a good person, to become an ethical person, to become a loving and compassionate person are found not only within the Buddhist teachings, right? They don't require specifically one to be Buddhist. And this is a really important concept because if we always insist on presenting things from a religious point of view or from a sectarian point of view, right, that can prevent those useful tools from being used, and it can actually become an obstacle to greater peace and harmony in the world. And so this is yes. So ultimately, the important thing to understand here, in spite of the principles that we're presenting today, is that to become a good, ethical, and a kind person, this is possible whether one is Buddhist or not, right? Buddhism is not required only for that. So if we can explain these principles in a way that are beyond religion, that don't require kind of ascribing to a certain belief or a certain religion, in many instances, actually, that can be even more beneficial. And so everybody needs to be happy, right? Everybody needs to have fewer problems. So what that means is that if we can take the tools inspired by Buddhism, right, but present them in a way beyond religion, this is something that can be beneficial to many. So in terms of kindness, in terms of developing positive mental qualities, this is the natural state and something needed by every single human being, just like a fish needs to abide in the water. And the world, of course, this is especially important because the world needs more people who are good, who are ethical, and who are kind.
Oda Alan to do us, Oda Alete, Yanonda, what it is. That ring anzo, that Ndiga Mazumbo, must say, you are no Yagcheta, Anzo Kanikanisi Jituka.
And so understanding all of those principles, then we will present a few tools after these preliminary remarks to establish those habits that allow one to be a good and a kind person.
That's you don't pass on Zolatak, Yan Laja Karakari Yungadu, Otanganzo Kazeta Timidity Jagartan, Chorosina, to other Trinamayana or Kangal Pegas.
So Geshe will share with you some of the advice of the holy beings, of those realized beings, about how to do this. And then if on top of that you also bring your questions, then it can be beneficial for everybody.
Oh, that knows the Triji, Tatering Anzu Kanga, that and the rich in college and Silekachi, that and the college, Talekachete, Tapi Topojido, Nipa Chimbochayachela.
And so in order for all of the effort that we put in to gather here together today, in order for our time to be together to become the most powerful and of the best possible potential, it's very important to ensure that the session is complete in the beginning, the middle, and the end.
So Mambo.
And so a lot of holy beings have explained that there's many people who try to do good things, who try to engage with what is meritorious or positive. But what happens is their efforts in that, sometimes the power is lost. One of the reasons for this is we're still kind of affected by afflictions such as anger. And when anger arises in the mind, then that positive potential can be degenerated, anger or the other afflictions. So, for example, if you are a farmer who wants to plant a crop of apples, oranges, bananas, or something like that, and you put a lot of effort into gathering together some seeds, but there's a fire and those seeds get scorched or burned, those seeds are not going to be able to give you your crop.
And so
this is really important to understand these principles, because otherwise what happens is we put some effort into doing something positive, into engaging and accumulating that positive potential, and then that potential is undermined, it's degenerated. And so there are a lot of teachings on the faults or the disadvantages of anger. One of the disadvantages of anger is that it can degenerate. It can decrease the power of the positive potential that we've tried to build up.
That into to us, what that social casitel shooting much lever in a ronge kanga, Kiwomeba, or that kanga,
and if we look beyond that principle, just in a very practical way, right? We see that when we get angry, this is something that undermines our own happiness, and it is also something that affects, that degenerates the happiness of the people around us. And so we have a principle where we take the positive potential or the virtuous karma that we've amassed, and we dedicate that to something positive. One of the purposes of doing that is that it protects that positive potential from being undermined by the arising of anger.
Ota jaso chimbo te ta ko meli lawo ko kombo soto marwas.
So the classic example that's given about how the dedication works is it's like if we have a cup of water, if we pour that water into a big lake or into a great ocean, as long as that ocean does not dry up, some of the potential or the essence of that water will be contained within it.
Ota ruru soso kono ja chimbo, ngowa ja chimbo tani cheba yina ta ani te me soso mi tatu de mandra bada ani tata ni zute ani dewal tan rivro yaris.
So the practice when we do it is based upon our good motivation. We accumulate the positive potential and then we make the dedication. We say, I dedicate that positive energy to a specific goal. And we want to make that specific goal as kind of big and vast as possible. Because what happens when we do that then is that we're able to benefit from that positive potential, from its momentum, right until the point that that goal is reached.
Ota te deji to ta kheba chi resi yaris. Ota ta ne ta deji ota dewan roke ta mombo chi tani chindo yaris.
So actually, like when we talk about in Buddhism, like multiple rebirths, this is the way that we set that positive momentum and we go from happiness to happiness, from happy rebirth to happy rebirth, all into the future.
Ota tani chi resi. Ta kalon te yotani ta ru so so ron jibo ron nye jibo majibo da wasono tona tel papi koro on rivichi mato ja chemo yuto yamaris.
And the same principle about trying to make it really vast also applies to our motivation. So when we make up our mind to do something positive, we want to think about something that doesn't just benefit ourselves and also not just the people close to us or the people that we like, but something beyond that, right? A vaster motivation than that.
Oh, Roro Sosa Kaze Kalon Jachembo, Nomelita, Shilre, Tana Mashilre, Anita, Temazita, Jacheratona, and Royozu Chet, Talakacho, Sombachan, Rere Latina Sosolata, Tisi to do in Nipamando.
And so at the beginning of the activity, we try to expand that motivation as much as possible, thinking I'm not just thinking of benefiting myself or those close to me, but I want everybody, all human beings, to be able to take some sort of benefit. And we can expand that to all living beings, animals, and so forth, to experience some benefit. May they achieve benefit through my action. This makes the motivation very vast.
Nazum Masenolata, the Pilet and the Mozi Yaras, Yamanamala Sagi Yaretini, ten Mujiga, Uzula Tenet, the Pilet and the Cheneson, New York, the Ligta, Kesotana, Kesochimura Yaris.
Sorry, I forgot one thing. So if we do this also, every single being that we've included in that circle of our motivation becomes a basis for accumulating more merit and more positive things. And also, we also talk a lot about negativity. I don't like to use the S word, sin, but you can think of it that way maybe. Geshe was explaining, if you think about that, when we make a mistake, right, when we do something wrong, it's usually just with a couple of people, right? So if we do our positive actions with this kind of vast motivation, they're always going to be more positive than any negativity we engage in, right?
That Yamul Rondo Yamaretini, Inayota, she would tomba sweet Senam, the sort of Sayinayota, you watch in the Dipile, the Tapaka, Gay Leni, Kilonda, which are by Konipa, and Manawach.
So Geshe said it can get very heavy when we think about negativity. So he likes to think of it in this way. I paid attention to that motivation. I tried to make this positive thing include a vast circle of sentient beings. Every single one of those sentient beings is a basis for the accumulation of merit. So if you think of it as a scale, looking at how many grams or kilograms something is, the positivity is always going to be so much more powerful than whatever negativity you may have engaged in. So this is really the instructions of those realized holy beings, that when we establish that vast motivation, this becomes something that is going to be so much more beneficial for oneself and others.
다 세서 뭐 너네 자본다고 지레스.
So let's bring forth a motivation that Geshe is describing from within the different sort of kind thoughts, like the king or the supreme amongst those kind thoughts, which is thinking that through coming together today and engaging in this positive activity, may not only myself, but others be able to benefit. Through my engagement today, may all beings be able to find the happiness they need.
소마 누진저 세한테 코티세 뭐게 저와 시나요 던지 som바 때 템보 가디 레바이는 쇼지 셈바도 시부 돈바사한테 디디 차로 야레스.
Right. So it seems something kind of like maybe unrealistic or hard to get our head around in the beginning. But these positive thoughts, those are how ordinary beings became bodhisattvas, became beings capable of helping others.
오당아로 시나이 지바라와 던지 세한테 가디 템보도 단저와 메바 가디나 버리 라고 주는 용 도바 치자소나 오다 쇼지 셈바사 차도 드리지레 와스.
So once we get habituated to it, when our inclination is normally to think of others and their benefit, and when that actually becomes our overriding motivation in our life, then at that point, we've become a bodhisattva.
오다 던지지 때 용하나 다 리세 쇼와지도 레레 그로시타이스.
So in order for us to be able to bring that forth, then we want a body and mind that are at ease and that are peaceful. So we will take a moment to develop that.
가제 타타루 소소는 중화지 찬용바.
So just settle into the body and mind. Think I am bringing the four elements into balance.
짐발 융기 제바 노지 초메비 소스 강가파. 야노요 섬바.
So any sort of thoughts that may be distracting or disturbing me, just gently allow those to drift away, just as the clouds obscuring the sun drift away on a summer's day.
짐바도 자이 노카 노지 다 세데바 자친구 그요바. 루지 좀마. 오다타트리지요 섬바지.
Now that the clouds have parted, the luminosity, the vastness, and the clarity of the sky-like mind has been revealed.
루세 좀마 템보조야 그체다 다 세티가 미바 우롱고를 레레 전에다 가마치스 거자이스.
So in order to build the stillness and the focus, the peace in body and mind, take a moment to direct your attention to the rising and the falling of your breath.
세 코르고 뭐데 할레베다 롱저 좀마도 롱저게서 가르이나 그게 어느 리더 봐 샤도 봐 보통도 봐 던지 롱지지요 소마지.
As we settle into the luminous and clear nature of that mind, think that within this space of the clear and knowing mind, any object of knowledge can come forth. Anything that wants to be understood, I can understand.
롱로 소송이니 봐 템보치니 바고셔와이나 로 용주가 다 보게 대실 바차도 다 던지 롱지야 뭐.
If I am able to use this mind to engage with what is positive, then I will really, in a very stable, meaningful way, be able to be of benefit to others.
Jitse po gazeta wa ina ya tan do ji ni ma yin ba yong so zu ba de so so chen di ge nian nu ji ge za chen bo de da yi de gong zhong zhou yi song ba ji.
Trying to bring forth this wish to benefit beyond just thinking of one, two sentient beings. Think how every sentient being I am connected with has at one time shown me kindness. And in this way, develop a feeling of closeness with those sentient beings, seeing them as something positive, as something attractive.
Yu zu ga nge yu zu cha wa ji. Ane de shi tian bo chi do de na zhe ma dian ba chi dian ba de da de sha wa ga ti shu lo wa shu song ba.
Think how wonderful if all of these beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. How wonderful if they were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May this come about. I will help this to come about. So we'll pause there.
So
those are the preliminary remarks, and this is all about getting the motivation in place. And so one of the things that Geshe would recommend if you're somebody who is trying to meditate at home, when you are choosing an object of focus, if you're doing a visualized object of focus, you want it to be actually as small as possible. And so the reason for this actually is that in the teachings on calm abiding, it explains that the larger we visualize our object of focus, the easier it is for the mind to become distracted.
Yeah. So
if you want to think of the size, you can think of the size of your thumb. Think of the size of your thumb. So Geshe said that, these days, so normally in calm abiding, we recommend visualizing the Buddha or maybe visualizing the feminine deity Tara. And when we visualize this, we want them in the mind's eye the size of a thumb. Geshe said it's really easy to experiment with this because with computers now, we can make images larger and smaller. So we can get an idea of what this is supposed to look like on our computer screen. And it's considered that like the smaller that image is, then the easier it will be to kind of bring forth and maintain that single pointed concentration or samadhi. So of course, when we speak about calm abiding, shamatha, right, this is like quite already like a high attainment. So for our purposes, we can think about it just as developing single pointedness, which means that we're able to stay on that object undistractedly.
소노도 소 운실 되게 말이 이실 되게 알았어.
And so also Geshe said that talking about that small image and looking at the image, that's just to develop the familiarity with what the object looks like, right? Because actual meditation isn't something that happens with the eye consciousness. Actual meditation is something that happens with the mental consciousness. So we need to bring forth a mental image of the object.
드네요 다니 그야도 다 던지가 신망 쇼를 다 슈첨보가 다 좋아요 근데나 소 미소가 텔라줘야
Yeah.
세계자도
생기자다.
디테일 소노도야.
Right. And so we talked about those are the strategies for preventing excitement or distraction. The other problem when developing concentration is laxity. So to prevent laxity, you want this mental image at about the level of your eyebrows. It's said to be helpful for preventing laxity.
다 디그 세시워도 가디나 다니 마크와도 가rel이나 오페도지 만도아지
So if we visualize it here, it will help us to develop more clarity about that meditation object, and it's also going to prevent us from getting tired or falling asleep.
다 세실론도야 할리베 다 소설과 다 공부하고 쉬체가 요바이나 저 데이터를 미바티자야 가지 뭐.
And if we are somebody who, doesn't have so many problems with laxity, but if we really struggle with distraction, we can experiment with moving the mental image lower, even down to about just above the navel.
다 대신와도 개바코로 보게 쉬체를 써서 다 해야 돼.
So this, so then these are the strategies to prevent that laxity and excitement.
셔도 고를 내가 체조 대신와 개바 아니 좋아. 보다 드리지 말했어. 컨트롤 말해. 다 컨트롤이 나오지래.
So laxity, excitement, and we could say, like, how would I describe that, Tro? Like ill will. Mukpa. Yeah. Laxity, excitement, and the fog of ignorance. These are kind of the main obstacles to developing that single-pointed concentration.
나로서 강가다 친지대 가와이나 잠바 야보 그도 와스 로주체 이나레 가르리나 있잖아 샤와 가르리나 잠바 야보 그거 해서 될 거대가 할레비 같이 못 쓰고 야레스.
So any kind of Dharma activity we're doing, also engaging in study, reading Dharma books, and so forth, right? Mindfulness is a factor that we need to have in place. So these kind of exercises to develop that concentration, these are ways to develop that mindfulness.
셔도 Geshe Sonam 마도는 헬레데야 다시 아버 쓰고 야르더니 이나 미빠진 거를 세 템보 자니 가서 듣다 대바 이나 대 잠바
So generally these days, like a lot of people enjoy the kind of meditation where you just relax by not thinking about anything, right? So why would we use an object? Because actually when we use an object and we hold this in the mind, that will develop our power of mindfulness. That other type of meditation will not.
다 되지래. 다 용주 미빠 다 가디나 봐 요러요러도야 될 미빠 요한도서나 요 세치자 용주 띵걸 치자나 다니 미빠 템바트 체르체르 요 템보 자기다레스.
And in fact, it is really sort of training ourselves, because when we take that object of focus, we are going to lose it, right? We are going to get distracted and think about something else. But each time we take the mind and then place it back on the original object, every single time we do that, we are developing our mindfulness. Yeah, so some more preliminary comments about developing our meditation.
And
another thing that we need in order to be able to have a happier and more relaxed life is to be able to abide in harmony. Harmony is something that is very important. So any sort of work or task that we set out to do, even if we are trying to establish like a group of meditating together, this harmony being in harmony with each other is something that is going to be the ground of success of that.
다 데시 워러와스 다 치자 치로조도 다 녀레가 추바이나레 노무이나레 가디나 텀보스유네 레가 가리나 어다 대와치 아키고지와레스.
And we can see that, right? Like if we look in any type of gathering of people, whether amongst Dharma friends, in a family, and so forth, if there is an attitude of trust and harmony, then whatever goal we have, it will be easier to work together towards it.
다 디눈이 저다 나로서 다 버게 치로조도 녀레 체키자 다더 텀보 다 여보 버게 삐다보 여보 차야라 다 가르거레 에서 라마 총가피 아니 라자 쪼지데 somba존나 사도로용존 som방에나 사도로용이 토제 som바달라라리 비토다 som바존나 아니 다 메쇼스.
So then if we want to have this attitude of harmony, and if we want to think about how that establishes good conditions, Geshe is reciting a verse from Lama Tsongkhapa, and the verse goes like this: if the thought is good, the ground and the path are good. If the thought is bad, the ground and the place are bad. Since everything depends upon the mind, always strive for positive thoughts.
다 텀보야보 그거세 카니게 전님 보셔 저 소싱인일 다 버게세 템보다 보자야도 여러도야데 같이 보레스.
So we talk about harmony as kind of a principle, and maybe we're able to say the word, but in terms of where harmony starts, right? It starts with us individually, right? Taking the responsibility for guarding and protecting our own mind and actions.
다 롱제 관계가 다 대시가 자원라고 돼서 som바som바 대이사 대가제 터터 템보도 다 제체르도야 당한줄래가 쪼데레스.
And we understand also that on that individual level, what we do, which really connects with our own happiness and with the happiness of others, is bringing forth an attitude of loving kindness. And so we want to kind of bring that forth in as strong and stable a way as possible.
다 로로소소를 야 노래 다 로로소소이나 로로소소 니에이나 소싱이네 som바som바지 요바이나 마센델이나 달레가 가리이나요.
And so if we are able to develop this attitude of loving kindness, starting with ourselves, starting with those people close to us, and build on that, then we will be able to always maintain that happy outlook.
다 som방엠바스 소싱이네 답세 디프게 som방엠바지냐 tane kaikе channyembo kazesheba ine tendo tiga som방엠바 tiga 가리이나 메데와치 소그레스.
And on the other hand, if we have a kind of negative attitude, right, selfish thoughts, then whatever kind of thing we strive to do, whatever environment we come into, we will bring kind of forth that energy of negativity.
다 가제 터터 드네면서도 세이나요 som바som보 슈르 다 센도야 달래가 제야 대시가 자와레스 라마송카페 대수군두아스.
So that's why in Lama Tsongkhapa's verse, he's emphasizing those good thoughts, that if we are able to bring forth that mind of loving kindness, then we will be able to bring the goodness, the positivity to that place and to those people.
다 제체 쪼지데 가르레서 나로서 서도 세이나요 끼고 용어도 많이 대시 용어도 많이 세대야데 루소서가 네바도 더 못하대 조질 투자레스 소신대바 소소 깔레카는 가고마서 소식의 손수도 터나 아니 네와 소소의 손수도 못하나 아니 어다 강에 저거야레스.
So one of the things that kind of challenges that, one of the things that's going to be an obstacle to that, is our happiness depending upon our wishes being fulfilled. If others and if situations are in accord with what we want, we find that we're happy. But when that is not the case, we find that we are unhappy.
레 마토 쇼도 마쇼 아니 저다 대화 용도 마요 세대한테 저 실로그 포게 터전조도 만조 실로그 다조 레몬도 시리아레스.
And so whether one is happy or not, whether one is peaceful or not, right? It is mistaken, but a habit to see that as depending on outer conditions, even though we know that really the main causes of happiness are not those outer conditions.
실로그 내서 따와이는 내 쉬나기 월에 내 쉬나기 워 말에서 타쳐야 요 말. 저 소신 대바도 더 마다 저지 두요아레스. 대시 용어도 많이 왔어야 돼. 저 실로도 내가 말했어. 저 노도 내가 말했어.
So what we should understand is that our happiness, it really is not depending mainly on those outer circumstances, mainly on whether we are getting what we want or not. But our happiness mainly depends upon the inner qualities that we cultivate.
This one, 다 진짜 드리지야. 이자 소식 내가 가디나 집어서 대바이나. 아니 기분 때문에도 벌써 가지고요 말했어.
So if we are always insisting on things kind of abiding in the way that we want, on our expectations being fulfilled, then we're never going to be able to develop a stable happiness like that.
다음 야 뭐거든 뭐네 로지야 뭐 로지 좀뭐 좀봐도 대바 이제도 대바지는 거다다 레디 하러 왔어. 대여도 알았어. 대메나 다 뭐네 대서 로지 차워. 다 던지지나 이제 먼저 소신 대화된 저도 그러마도 기본에는 노네 우가러 왔어.
So if one is already sort of kind-hearted, if one is already sort of predisposed to love and compassion, what we want to do is build on that, and in this way we'll experience an increased happiness. However, for people whose habitual energy is not like that, for people who are more self-centered, we need to make that determination and we need to change our habits, because our happiness is never going to be reliable if it's depending only on those outer conditions.
다 샤와 가리나 소신 대화도 더 못했을 때 저 노가 솜바 좀버치 단계라바 노지 요바이나 가리나요 소신 대화도 태야를 리라고 자디 말했어.
So if our happiness and if our activity is connected with this mind of loving kindness, then it is a much better chance of it being a stable sort of source of happiness. We'll be able to maintain happiness in all situations.
This one, 다 던지지 다 솜바 좀버 다 요는 돈을 야버려. 대신에 다 대가지 터도 슈처도 다 대시가 조지레스.
So what we want to do is establish this kind of habit of loving kindness. If that is already present within us, we want to build on and improve that, and this will create those continuous causes of happiness.
다 소신인의 솜바 좀버 셔바이나 다 여금인들 다 가셔 할레비 샤와 냠바체케 안다문다 투야요 알아봤어.
Right. And so even if we make a decision to be a kind person, right, we're still going to be meeting with very difficult people, with people who are kind of predisposed to negativity.
다 던지나 다는 샤와 냠바데 과야를 가져 터터 소소가 달래 같이. 노는 내세 마냐야들 할레비 뭐 같이 못 저기 알았어.
And so in those type of situations, right, what do we do in the world, right? Where is the sense of justice? Well, we try to, if we can do something to prevent the negative action or thought, we take that. But what we try not to do is keep an ill will, keep a feeling of aversion to the person doing the negative action.
다 시고 동바스에는 셔바보도 샤와니 예와 셴냐라 달래 같이 주모시게 될리라고도 말해.
So the holy beings advise us, you want to have a differentiation between the person engaging in the action and the negative action itself. If we can see those as distinct, that's going to be very helpful.
다 샤와 냠바 과야데 가져 터터체 못들 컨트롤 마사 다너 내세 텔레주 마냐 같이 말해.
So the advice is, if we're able to do something that is going to prevent that negative action from happening, we direct the energy to preventing the action itself. But we try not to hold on to anger, and especially not to hold on to ill will towards the person who is engaging in the action.
손질했더니 때냐 야보치 뱀보치 뭐치 게저티 바래. 던디서 가디나 다 강강을 째와야 보 셴바던 이제도 대마 그거요나 물레가 시기 두자 뭐 용거다. 때는 류와야 간데스도.
Yeah, so there was when the Buddha was teaching on this, there was one time there was a king in the audience, and the king in the audience kind of objected to the teaching, and he says, if you talk about love and compassion and how those are the ideals that you should have, but if I was just always loving and compassionate in my kingdom, I wouldn't be able to prevent people from doing wrong things, right? Because there's many people who are predisposed to evil-mindedness.
ta malaka ducha cheke te jikama ka ke do mata ramda laka ducha cheke te nyapa tu ga marwes.
And so what am I supposed to do? Am I just not supposed to punish the thieves, not supposed to punish the people who are committing violence? What am I to do?
ta tel sunji go le tel ta mate ya po cha do ta de je mombo ge thon la o ta gar se nyapa to na do res ta ina yo umbo pe to thula do ya ta tni nyapa ma to.
So the Buddha's advice, and so of course, like we're talking like 2,500 years ago, right? So the context of this is the punishment for stealing would be like a beating or maybe even losing one of your limbs, right? So what the Buddha advised the king was to reform them, maybe you have to give some type of punishment, but you don't want to do a punishment like a beating or something like that is going to cause lasting harm. So that was the Buddha's advice.
o ta jabu de o ta ke che mo res was o ta tan ji ren de sa nga ro se ina ku to ma yo to le la wo mar was to te mo ne se ka ya de ane to ta nyo da tu ka ka che mo res.
So one of the things that Geshe mentioned earlier was towards the person who's doing the action, we try not to get angry or to have ill will towards them. And he said, not getting angry at somebody who's doing something unjust, that's actually really hard. So that's going to be hard for a lot of us. So what he would suggest is just try not to hold on to that ill will, right? That wish to harm them.
Control do ne se ni go no ne wo so ba zumbo de pa pe thula to ya la ta ne se ti ga ta ha le bi shu mo pe dur tu ya res.
So in terms of like the obstacles to this mind of loving kindness that we're trying to develop, anger is an obstacle to that, right? But ill will is the one that is really pernicious, is the one that is really dangerous.
o ta tan ji ren de ta wa na ngang zu ne me yu zu o yu zu lo so so ni nu yi ga za chen bo ta ga ya o ta te ji se zo ka ka res.
And so then going beyond that, right, we also talked about how we want to see all human beings, how we want to see all sentient beings as being very close and connected to us. So why is that an ideal that we want to cultivate?
o ta tel tan ja wa shom ba ga tan yo ha ka sa wa ja wa shom ba ga tan sin je yu zu za chen bo yin pe ta ji se ka chen bo o ta ji ya re ji la ma no.
So there is a scripture called the Uttara Tantra Shastra, or the Sublime Continuum by Buddha Maitreya, where he explains why we want to develop this.
o ta ji se zo ji de ane sin je yu zu li je ge sa de sin je yu zu de ane song ji len do ke ta ba ya shu len do ke shong ju se ma do ke ga ta ri tu de ba ji res.
So one of them is that all sentient beings have the potential, they have the Buddha,
song ji ge nim bo ji re to mo ti ya
they have the Tathagata Garbha, or the Buddha nature. Yeah, the Ningbolam the Buddha nature. So they have, things sound different in English sometimes. So they have the Buddha nature. So this is one of the reasons that we see those beings as precious, right? Because they can become enlightened. We see them as precious from the point of view of their potential.
o ta sin je yu zu se na nga ro so tu no ya ra wa o ta te sa nga ro so song ji ge nim bo ji re de ya re o ta ten da me ya ne zu ya bo mo won was.
So when we say all sentient beings also, it's important to keep in mind that we're included in that configuration of all sentient beings. And because all sentient beings possess the Buddha nature, that also means that we have the potential to reach the state of enlightenment.
o ta te song ji ge nim bo ji yan ba te ta nga ro so sin je yu zu song ji ge nim bo ji yan ba te ta ji se chen bo so ke ji she ba res.
And when we talk about why we should see sentient beings as precious based upon the Tathagata Garbha, or the Buddha nature, there is sort of a 3-point statement made about this.
sin je yu zu de ane song ji do ji zi do ma ko ro so chhle pa yu sa ge ye re de ya re su su ge na cho shi do chhle
Chine, semshin tamshila lebgires.
on do sa ge shi re sin je yu zu.
And so in this scripture, it gives a really interesting perspective that all sentient beings are the receiver and the cause of the enlightened activities of the Buddha, of Tara, of all of the other holy beings. They are the receiver and the reason for the arising of that enlightened activity.
소지도実로마 코로스고 로바 제가 코로 보게 계세다 보데 니마도 니메 계세도 용주로 보게 기봐요.
And the other thing that's important to understand too is that that enlightened activity of the Buddha and all the other holy beings, we can think of it as like the rays of the sun. That means that it reaches and touches every single sentient being. It never considers, am I going to help this one or that one?
강에 요주 매봐서야 대시 그 타투게 대시를 쳐야 돼. 코로스고 달래가 소지 보게 틀려요.
So, and the quality of this enlightened activity is that it helps sentient beings to be able to diminish all of their problems and leads them to happiness.
어다 던지기 찬에 따와 이나요. 현재 요주 자체 모두 소지가 님보지래 디가네.
And this is one of the reasons because they are the cause and receivers of this enlightened activity, that all beings possess Buddha nature and that all beings are precious.
어지세지 다 지세니 바치 때라 요주를 다니 여며봐. 다 현재 요주를 다 알아서도 요주 다 요주라 소지가 때는 세가 또 많이 돼도 알아서 세가 또 많이 이 찬에
The next one, so because it radiates in all Buddhas, that's the first line of the verse. The next one is because it is thus indivisible. When we think about the emptiness, the lack of inherent existence of a Buddha's mind and the emptiness of our own mind, it is exactly the same emptiness. When we look at this characteristic, the Buddhas and the sentient beings, when we look at the perspective of the Buddhas and sentient beings from the point of view of the ultimate mode of abiding of their minds, they are indivisible. And because of that indivisibility aspect, of that emptiness of the mind, this is another reason why reaching enlightenment, reaching that state of Buddhahood is possible for all sentient beings. And then the next line says, because all sentient beings have the potential, they always have the Buddha nature. So this means that all sentient beings always possess this potential for enlightenment. And we talk about this Buddha nature or potential for enlightenment from two aspects: the developmental lineage and the naturally abiding lineage. So this verse helps us to see how, from the point of view of their potential and their capacity, all sentient beings are precious and close to us. And therefore, we must always do our best to see them in a positive way. So, you could maybe raise an objection that, okay, like these are all the reasons why we should see them as precious. But like, if this person has never been connected to me, hasn't been kind of connected or interacting with me in any way, like, why do I actually have to see them as precious? Like, what does that actually do? And so one of the reasons for this is that if we think about sentient beings as a collective, in terms of us being able to reach our own enlightenment, this happens in equal measure due to the kindness of the Buddhas, of the holy beings, and due to all sentient beings. They are of equal importance. So from the ultimate point of view, thinking about really kind of the subtle causes, all of the problems that we experience are connected with sentient beings. But every happiness that we enjoy right? The causes of that cannot be reached without sentient beings.
tene sonjedo jizu roma koros za chimbo tse senche tse za chimbo ma za ten choros karches oski no sonjedo shuje sabas ke shok diwas
Ale. So then seeing that actually in terms of reaching enlightenment, the kindness of the Buddhas and sentient beings is of equal importance, how is it that we can respect and admire the Buddhas, but we dismiss sentient beings?
oda deji kanga jise zo de shomba sema zu somba zumbo ge ya ani shomba do niji pure sli na yawa me ba dan do ge ya jisa jise res
So these are all of the reasons why we not only want to cultivate love and compassion within our mind, but we want that love and compassion to be without discrimination, to be applied to all beings equally.
this one oda de oda ke chamo da sta de
Yeah, so then if there's questions before the break, we can welcome questions. So it can be the folks here, but also the folks at home. Don't be shy.
ya chawayo do me chawayo na chawato
Any questions?
So,
Yes.
so you mentioned expectations.
Yeah.
In there, and I was struggling a little bit with having expectations of myself and of others. And it's not so much, well, I'm afraid it might be anger if you expect too much of people, but I just wonder, is it absolutely incorrect to have some expectation of others' behavior?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to say your question just for the folks at home. So it's about expectations about oneself and others. And Geshe was talking about how this could lead to disappointment and anger. So the question is, does that mean like it's like we shouldn't have any expectations of others at all? Like even in terms of basic behavior, right? That was it. Yeah. Then dupa seria di samsam di kongjo gi yongsa dabochi tuwa. Then dupa nyunga katsu yuna yagare tuwas. Ine jendag dinso dupa tets yuna digi mare base perna mi chatsangwa yak taksho di sutram dam dempa nupa makya ya dapochik yagadus chutang di dupa res di yang notur base.
mara ndeba korosena notike mares go ya re yin min go ya res
Los.
akasa chadum matam ne ba sana
Ale.
akasa rawa ni ne chadum matam ba tan deba la dan ri mo bo ya res ri ni ja chos was
So Geshe would explain that like those expectations or those desires or wishes, these can be kind of some that are based on misconceptions and some that are based on correct understandings. So we want to distinguish between those two kinds of wishes.
no deba korosena puja ski mare duga ski mare yin min go ya res
So we can't definitely say that like an expectation or a wish is something universally negative. You're absolutely right. Like we wouldn't want to say that.
deba do dumba do akasa rawa ta mi pa jala ba yin teji kanga ngazul go ya chi re ma to mo puja ki mare
Because even if we think about it in spiritual cultivation, right, that starts with a wish to achieve something better or to improve. On that basis, we develop an aspiration. And with that wish and that aspiration, then we can bring forth the effort necessary to achieve that, right? So in that sense, the expectation or the wish is something positive.
ta ngazul page ko ga ten deba che ta ba do tani akasa rawa chushi me bar ji ta ngazul go ka nge ta ru so so le yin re shel yin re ta nyo da zo de chi
But what we want to avoid is those expectations, right? Those desires to become so powerful that they kind of underpin our contentment, underpin our ability to accept situations as they are. Because what happens with that then is we fall into conflict and it becomes a cause of like unhappiness in both oneself and others.
Ota kandi go azu jani yin min je pe chi la ma ten be zung she go ga du ya sa ti yin min je azu ja ya zo de 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 wa chi mo re zung bi she ba ya bo
Right.
ak chi la ma ten be zung she sa de
So like the Dalai Lama often talks about ethics or good conduct beyond religion, right? And he talks about that because that should be something that is universal, right? So a wish or a desire in that sense, right? It's actually a positive thing, It's a positive thing.
어떤 내가 체토바도 추심매는 단 좀블리다 다 시가 고유리인데 아까서와 다 뭐다 룸발리 말리인데 가르이네 단요도 강가 자와테르.
But we can also see how when those expectations become very powerful, when they become like attachment or desire, right? This attachment, this grasping, this desire, it leads to conflicts between people, between countries. In fact, it's the cause of a lot of the disharmony, environmental degradation, all of these other many problems in our world.
야, 다행당 안 주시워서 뭐 자야이네 구자리즈이네 다 강가 끼고 매바 체주 간디지이나 다 대도 좋아요 파시시워레스.
So we can see that when desire is excessive, right, it can lead to competition, to wars, it can lead to corruption, it can lead to types of behavior actually which cause unhappiness for a lot of people.
다 룸바 간디지이나 다 마트의 traditional 사이네 다 룸바이네 출라톤도가 다 딘좀블리실 내가 이상 가로솔라네.
Yeah. So when it gets out of hand, when there is a war fought, right, and we can see that especially like in the present moment, right, that destroys the happiness of the people. It destroys the environment. It destroys the energy of the place, right? And that all starts with that excessive attachment, that excessive expectation.
어다 던지지 다 좀비시야바 마야라 마좀보 숑바도 데바 니제도 데바 가자 모른도소나 다 나는 룸발이 있는 좀블리실라다 갈래갈래 좋아요
And so that also goes to the, says something about the importance on the individual level of teaching people to be kind, right? Teaching them ways to cultivate their love and compassion, teaching them ways to be ethical, because that is actually what is going to be the foundation for change, for improvement of the situation of our world.
시도 간조 대시 그거요 세나요 다 내가 용기요 아래 가디데 쇼주시세 그거요 숑바 그거요 니지 그거요 사테지 강한 내가요 내가레스 이나에 된 내가요 같은 것도 뒤가기 말was.
So just to go back to this distinction, right, between like this kind of unhelpful and helpful forms of expectations or wishes, right? We talked about wanting or needing happiness. Contextually, that can be a very positive thing. If we think because of that, then I want to develop love. I want to develop compassion. I want to train in bodhicitta. These are all desires that are something positive.
다 내반 내쳐도 돼서나 다 내쳐래 돈비 깔랑가서 강게 되게 말했어. 다시 원래. 다 이나요 다야 세터 원래는 내쳐 배도 뽕거요 말했더니 강게 맞게 뒤세질래는 거야.
So actually in kind of the dharmic presentation of this, like in the beginning, when we have those desires, right, that to achieve something positive, that's still mixed with attachment. And for a beginner, that can be very frustrating, right? That can lead to difficulties. But it is said that as one kind of becomes more realized, for example, as a bodhisattva, that attachment is actually no longer a hindrance or something that is harming.
다 이나요 다 내쳐올래 돈비간에 펴도 제야당가서 뭐시 원래스. 변은 노멀레 이나래 파말레 이나래 소식이 녀레 이나래 가리나고 on devan decha de yaretene somba sombo ta yapo mombo shu kopyado yares.
And Geshe also says that he doesn't want to like dismiss attachment completely for our partner, for our family, for our friends, because those feelings of attachment that we have, they lead us to be kind to those people, right? They lead us to want the best for them. They lead us to wish for their happiness, right? So even though it's mixed with attachment, it's still a positive thing. Yeah. So all of those, because it's based on these distinctions, right, of like near and far, those feelings are mixed with a little bit of attachment. They're mixed with a little bit of ignorance, but they are still largely positive.
So
we can come to a further discussion of that. So any more questions? Yeah, Tekili.
This is an offshoot of yours. Yeah. What would you say is the difference between your explanation of expectation versus a hope versus acceptance?
And so the asking about differences of like how we say this, if we think about like a wish or an expectation for others versus like a hope. And so yengi chedu deux pares, deux personnes, deux chakdang, Jawa Tetsi Rewa. Yining also Rewa, double cheek samutana. Geshe actually, so in the Tibetan, the word for hope is rewa, right? And the word for like this wish is like a dupa. And it's interesting that de, that first word is also the first sound in the word for attachment, which is duchak. But Geshe is not saying that there's not necessarily a huge distinction between a hope and like a want or a wish.
You said acceptance.
Oh, did I miss something?
I'm looking at the three of them.
What are the, sorry, did I miss one of them?
No, so with hope, it's almost like it's a positive thing first. It's we're grasping at something that does cause suffering.
I see, okay.
And versus acceptance, it kind of starts with disappointment, maybe even grief, but ends up more peaceful.
Yeah, so the acceptance is almost like kind of like that chukshi, which is like a contentment. Tizgwa ko tambu rewa chi gyore jwa dene rewa di drugo res la tene ducha zimpa chi gyongire dwa dene dela tene tets kangye chungire dwa iningan so chukshi di yuna nitsu kari yuna kelen tubya dabu chi gre dwa.
Yeah, there was on that Chushi Tiga correct. No, there was the on Yamu Chetabat quick was.
Yeah, so Geshe said that what you mentioned about that acceptance, Dekili, I would also throw out another word, contentment. Part of what contentment is being able to accept things as they are. Geshe said that prevents the arising of afflictions that relate to that hope or that wish.
There was an tan the mother which is so going to some.
So a want or a wish is also very much like an aspiration, because when we want something, it's striving to achieve it. So that want, right? If it's for something like love, compassion, or bodhicitta, right? That's an aspiration that is positive. So Geshe, yeah, Kawaju Gyulama. So in the Abhisamaya Lamkara, actually, it talks about bodhicitta as the wanted. So it's the wanted thing, right? So it uses that language, which Geshe thinks is interesting. Yeah. So, and also there's a debate about this. When they debate this text, Geshe was saying that they talk about bodhicitta as a want, but it's actually not really a want in the fullest sense. So this is kind of a semantics that they unpack in their debates. And then it also gets into like the more esoteric thing of like, is this a mind or mental factor, right? It gets into that as well. Yeah. So a want can be an aspiration in the sense that this is something that I need, right? It's aspiring to have something. We could explain want as being something like that. And merely wanting something or aspiring to have it, we wouldn't want to say that that's an object of abandonment, right? Because like there's many things that you want that are actually very wholesome and positive. But if that want starts to go in something of direction of what is arising anger, of what is arising like strong desires attachment, of what is arising jealousy and other things, right? Then it is more like something to be avoided. So for example, if you think about it in terms of like thinking about an expansionist mentality, right? Like if you think about on the level of nations, like I need this piece of land and I really want it, and then aspiring to get it, what outcome can that lead to? It can lead to war or conflict, right? So we would see the disadvantage of that.
어다 대지 거다요 당연히 님 도바 차서 왔어. 네 거 부자 쳐.
Right. So that is really a wish that is in accord with reality, right? We want to make sure that the wish is in accord with reality.
소소 도도 매바지도 단대바 싫어서나 다 때는 부자 쳐. 그래서 소소 도도 매바 소소 다들 가르쳐 그래. 단다살에 더 어떤 지리에서.
Yeah, so that's what he would say about that.
어떤 대화도 넘바도 대 미파 강가 님목쇼로 다 미파선 대녀다서 대화도 넘바데 님모도 내서나 근데 그다 부자 쳐.
So if you say, when does the wish or the want become something to be abandoned? It's when the wish or the want is tending towards an afflicted mind, right? If it's tended towards affliction.
다 토지에 때도 거보게 휴로서나
Yeah.
어디 거겨겨와 쳐.
If that wish or the want is in the direction of something that is positive, for example, a positive mental quality, then it is something to be taken up.
Yeah.
We have a question from social.
Sure. Yeah.
Aspiration for union between object and subject. How to truly hope, want, wish for a Buddha embodiment.
For a Buddha embodiment, I'm just going to say Buddhahood. That's what they mean, right? Yeah, I think that's what they mean. Yeah. Okay. Nganso dumpa di yuldang yulchen. Did he say getting rid of the separation, or she getting rid of the separation between subject and object? Can you read that to me again?
Yeah.
Union.
For union between object and subjects. How to truly hope, want, wish for Buddha embodiment.
Okay, so I guess in this case, then the object is going to be Buddhahood, and the subject is the person who wants to achieve it, right? Am I understanding that? Okay. Nganso yuldang yulchen sena yul sena chepabores yulchen sena yulchen sena mires yul sena jangchub sangigi gopang tires. Dinso, and the question is, how do we
How to truly quote, want, wish for Buddha embodiment.
want for that? Okay. Dinso yul jangchub di dang yulchen sosoti yewa mi chepa mune tubya dupa kandes kegures.
간데스.
Yeah, it's phrased very.
눈이 서서라든 저기 왔어.
Can you ask them what they mean? It's phrased very elegantly, but also kind of esoteric, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's like just that person wants Buddhahood.
말아 봐. 저기랬어. 빼나 드리래도 왔어. 더바돈 대바돈 더바.
Yep.
대바돈 더바세나 빼나 빼나 쇼바돈 이진다고 잡아이나. 나는 쇼바 첨보가 다 예때 폐뭐 뭐시도 무슨 또 알았어. 무슨이나요.
Right.
쉬고 도마소.
Yeah. So Geshe is kind of bringing it very sort of down to earth. So if that's not what the person's asking for, please ask back. But Geshe said that if you're thinking about how you want subject and object in terms of you want to achieve that positive mental quality, like love and compassion, how do we bring that forth in a sincere way? The first step is to think about the benefits of love and compassion.
그래서 다 자첨보 가세 손도 또 손나 텔라 템베트니 쇼바 첨보 텔라다 대와지도 못 열는 게.
So when we think about the benefits, for example, of this mind of love, and we become convinced of those, the natural consequence is, I want this mind of love, right? This is something that I want to achieve.
그래서 다 대화때 가세 슈 더버지 레바이나 아니 텔라 템베트니 다 이니 멘저 그거도 소면 넘바도 내가 더버지 슈 더버지.
And when we have that wish that comes forth, if we kind of nourish that wish to be able to achieve that mind of love, we have this idea of, I definitely need this. This is something I should strive towards. And that takes it beyond the wish to an actual aspiration.
다 덤버다 레로 차워지나요. 다 레로 가져 슈치고 가는 거 알아서 슈자인 게 알아서.
And when it goes from being a wish to an aspiration, that aspiration is more powerful. So that's going to help us get rid of the laziness that may be blocking us from achieving that thing.
This one, oh, time number top of the let's ask on con number of us, so you show much in sales. Togmarawas, Hegmarawas,
Yeah.
changing Gorshu.
But can we achieve love merely through an aspiration itself? No, we can't, right? That aspiration is a very powerful step, but it needs to have the result of the necessary joyous effort to work towards achieving that aspired thing.
Oh, Tanisa, no, never knows tan dividend tata near to Kalakalan dividend was.
And so when we establish it like this, right, the wish, the aspiration, and then we bring forth the effort, we become closer and closer and closer to the object of attainment that we want to achieve.
Oh, that you know, Chikanga teres, Yaru, it's all day, Jugatale.
And so that is how to kind of strive towards that we wish. Is this what the person was asking? Did they give you any follow-up?
The rephrase of the question was, is this an aspiration? This wish for you?
For subject and object being indivisible,
Yeah.
is that an aspiration? Okay. Yudang yuchen yerwa mepa, yul jangchup sangi gopangdi, yul chen
So,
chepabodi soso res.
Yeah, yeah.
Then so yerwa mepa chaya di dunpa rebes, di digi rebes.
Your Meba Chaya, your Meba Chaya Senata, your Meba Chaya Senata, Sonsitirwa, Sonsit in the Bachagas, your never so good.
Yeah. So Geshe said that thought of like, I want to become indivisible from Buddhahood through actualizing it. Yes, this is an aspiration. Yeah.
Never done the bus and that was.
Yeah. So we should understand that aspirations are a mind, right? So it would be the mind that is wishing that. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So Geshe is going to propose a break. So let us come back in about 15 minutes. People here can relax a little bit, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes.
Yeah,
Sorry. Oh, you mean dinner as well? Okay.
뭐야 다 나도 당긴 거 마셔 봐 너지 대신에 보게 라야라 다 보게 다투게 되시선 한번 돼 좋아 당연히 보게 되시 여와 매비 되시라 봐라 이니 먼저 다 지보가 다른 세종 보도 선바도 이제도 대지보가 다 배도요
So when we started our conversation, Geshe started with this point about real happiness, and he talked about a final happiness, which means a happiness that is stable, unchanging, and lasting. So we can think like, what's the method to achieve this? Is being kind, is being a good person enough to achieve this? And the answer is we can't achieve that through kindness alone.
shomba nyuji seba chushila soba kanga ka chimbo ta hale ka chimbo wa so dandani ka chimbo es ta yina yo porque tempo chi to tashi ma yo chi ni ni menja ni ne se shi shira mena konzo ta porque pi do bo cha do ya ma es
So we can bring forth our love, we can bring forth our compassion, we can bring forth our patience, and those are all extremely important, but they won't be able to lead to that true and lasting happiness. In order to be able to achieve that, we need the wisdom that understands the nature of reality, that sees the way things really are.
ta sunjin zombale de pe ni la yo ta pe ge ya yo zo shira den de la ta qing yong se zo ba de zo shira shi wi den de yi se ne wo de su ga res
And in fact, this is one of the main reasons that the Buddha came to the world and that he taught the Dharma. There's a saying that the Buddha's teachings were given solely for arising wisdom.
ta de ge ya de ta ngang zo shu lo ka qing bo ji de la ga re za wa shira no re be
Zawashira.
mo lo de za wa shira yi je re
Ale.
le to ni mo se pi tar mande
Mindu.
yar ke se
Ale, little mumon sepetar.
da ba ma ja
Looking for
What
a verse.
did it
Oh,
do?
yeah, sorry.
o le to ni mo se pi tar le to ni mo no to le de da ji le ji ba no tum ba ni jing ga ban jar
So Geshe is giving a verse from the Root of Wisdom text by the great Nagarjuna. And it says that the end of karma and afflictions is liberation. From karma and affliction, conceptual consciousness. From those thoughts come fabrications. All of these are halted by emptiness.
ta ngaro so ane ni ta ni ka ga de wa to dunga kan de ji na yo zo ta le la de ni shwa ji res
So the first thing that we see here is it talks about karma. So this means that all of our temporary happiness, all happiness and suffering, it arises from karma. It arises from causes.
ta le se ne mi ta bo ti sa bo yo re zo le se ne sha wa le ka la de le ka se
So karma might sound like an unfamiliar word or esoteric, but karma just simply means action, really.
ta de mi ta le kin de ge wa ta de ge le de yo ta le de yo zo ko ta ga ji me ji me le shwa ma zo ni mo la de ni shwa ji res
But when we think about the action itself, right, if it's a negative action, the action doesn't just arise in a vacuum. The action arises due to affliction, mistaken minds.
tan di ni mo de ta ga ni mo de ra pa chamo ta ma ri da ma ri pa yo se yo ma ni mo ra pa de cho kon to ma ja to do la so ba ta ni mo ra pa ji se
And when we think about the afflictions or the mistaken minds, you know, you might think of some famous examples like attachment, anger, pride, jealousy. But these are seen as the coarser or the branch afflictions. They are not the root affliction.
ta ni de de ge do as ta te mai mi te se mi se chimo si wo re do as ngaro so tan da ina le ngam ba chi sa ba ni mi je ni mo tra po te ji la te ne ta le ngam ba chi sa ga
So really we see that the reason that we engage, especially in heavy negative activities, is because of a very strong affliction or mistaken mind that arises.
ta pe na sen che se ke ga ta ma du tani mo mo yo ro as te ji na yo zo sha do pa do tani le cha ne cha pa ti ga sen che se ni la ta le ka chi ga
So we can think, for example, of people that kill animals. What are the reasons that people kill animals? Often it's because of attachment, right? Attachment to the taste of pork or chicken or any of these other things, right? That's why a lot of killing of animals happen.
Oh, that there, Tama Jaya, don't they, Gina, they shot Dulan, they were Chimbore, Kundo Dulan, they were Chimbukanga, you know what it is.
But if we go beyond that and we think even about something like a war, right? Wars are also fought connected with these minds of anger and attachment. That's often what's behind the fighting.
What an Yamu Kangi Gatawa, Zochi, that Yamu Rapa Kangi Gatar, Rapa Zochi, they shot it.
Yeah, and so and so
Sure.
all of these coarser afflictions, right, like anger and so forth, we can also see that they're attached to that attachment that we mentioned.
What I'm going to ask, what that there, that Tendrigan Yamuter, you rapate, so you de at so collega siege of yours and such mind, no to.
Namtok, yeah. And so those coarser afflictions, how are those arising? They are arising due to those namtok, which here it's translated as mental fabrications. We could also say projecting thoughts or discursive thoughts.
Oh, that's also the Batsa, which is also not only about Nets of the Matembe, that's also Mobo, Shilatini. Tanita, or that Yamutation, Yamurapat.
So from our doubts, from our suspicions, from our discontent, the mind starts to spin with all different kinds of thoughts and projections, and this leads to the arising of more afflictions.
This one, oh, that there, that Deji Kanga, Yuzu, Zawat, so sees of yours, Danzo Mariba, that it, Sawazawa the correct.
So what is the root of all of those things, of that entire situation? The root is the ignorance grasping at the self.
Oh, Tangarusol, Deshing in a Jiguan in Major, let when you must have it up again. Talakas Mashana, Deshing in it.
So if we say that we want true happiness, if we really want that happiness that is lasting and unchanging, then we need to achieve some sort of freedom from karma and affliction.
That Kachimbo is that Ganzo Tumba to Tenju is at Tumba Sat, or Tunisa,
and because we want to be able to overcome those, then it is very important to cultivate, to understand emptiness and dependent arising.
That Tumbani Lojus Guare, Tumbani Latagno, Jego, Jugo, or that Yaki, Mombokism.
We talk about how important it is to study emptiness, how important it is to understand emptiness. And then we do things like analytical meditation and placement meditation to try to realize it.
What that Tumbani said, Digitapa Lacasetoba and Yamurapa in a Yoko key yet, sons of the Meba. Oh, that's a Maripa in a Yoki, sons in it, no Dioba.
So when we understand emptiness, it is really something transformative because we can see that that object that we might be grasping at, it doesn't exist in the way that we thought it did. We can see that the ignorance grasping at the self, right, that dominates so much of our experience, its way of thinking is actually something that's totally mistaken.
Oh, Tanganzo,
And so even as a beginner, if we try to think about emptiness a little bit, if we put just a little bit of effort into it, there are aspects of it that we're going to be able to use immediately.
Tumbani Lakazo, Chite time, Lilago Pitape to Twetch, Penanzo, Machil Kurosakravas. Kurosavical Moko, which are Singarosan, Zusa Yopi, no one in it, Zusa Yamaritan, so Chikudo teaches over your race.
Yeah. Oh, so for example, how can this work on a practical level? How can emptiness function for us on a practical level? Think about the experience of getting angry at somebody. We get angry at someone, and then we have this very powerful image of them, like they are terrible, they are awful. It seems like there is some sort of pinpointable, findable person who just has completely negative in quality, right? That's the appearance that arises in the mind.
Leka Noa do Mombochi Yaritene, Yina, Kunto Tigasons in it, 자와 돼
Mhm.
누구 주상인을 요 말했어 다 이나 기지 요래 손노토는 가서 소화도 보지 야들 알았어
So anger, of course, it's arising connected with many things, but we could say that it starts with this initial misperception or misapprehension, which is what? That there is a truly findable, pinpointable, awful, terrible person who upset us.
다 그게 레카시기지 요도 요 알았어 이제 요할 때저 그렇게 그게 열어 뭐지라 때네 맞지 요 알아 마도 소소 그 소마 노지는 저기 주사지 된대 요 말했어
So with emptiness, what we think is, yes, okay, there is this person who did this action that offended or upset us. And that person is actually a coming together of many parts and many causes and conditions. But we have this idea that there is some sort of findable, truly existent person, when that is not the case at all.
다 소소 때에서 다 제정은 간조 땐데 통통 했지 다로 아빠 통통 했지 땐데 요 내도 비가네 빼는 뭐 늦어야 나로 소신이 파조아 많이 봐 코로 롱이니 요빙 노아지 샤기 하래 스콘도 슈라 볼레 비가라
And we can break this down and use this to check in a way that even as an absolute beginner can start to make a little bit of sense. Going down midi yuris, didn't it?
덤데 뒤져 연바데 소식 색깔을 칸데 거 어떤 많이 되자 그래 신도 가서 말해 소식을 로이서 파조아 많이 봐
Ale, ko
코로
you
니니치 요빙 때 깔깔깔
And the first part, getting the sauce today. And the first part of that misperception is we think that all of those unpleasant qualities are arising solely from the person who we are upset with. We think that that appearance of that unpleasantness that we are seeing is totally from the side of the object of that other person, and that we have nothing to do with what we're perceiving.
그런 롱이니치 뒤져 연바데 소소소만 노지 저대요나
Yeah.
시 코통아이나 대 노지 저통 그때 도움은 와스
And we can check very easily to see if this is true. So one way of checking this is if they are really this kind of like awful, terrible, unpleasant person from their own side, it follows that every single person that they encounter would find them just as obnoxious as we do, right? If it was from their side, that would make sense.
다 뚜마니가 레 돈비가는 가서 제토야 대르질래 가래 된데레 알아스
So that's kind of just a very easy example to see how like the principles of emptiness can be a very tangible way, even as a beginner, to start to work with some of these afflictions.
빼는 가서 학고 토야 대 마르카 까니 말해
Mark Carney, yeah.
코 단다 신지 연바데
Yeah.
그런 롱이니 잡아 말했어 메도 뚜발라 때네 파조아지래 알아스
So, for example, take like a different sort of example. If you say the name Mark Carney, right? So I think probably everyone here will know who he is, but maybe a lot of the people at home won't. So that's the current Prime Minister of Canada. So if you say Mark Carney, when you hear that name, immediately the idea Prime Minister arises in the mind. But Mark Carney is not the Prime Minister from his own side. There were causes and conditions that came together and a process through which he was given the name Prime Minister. So now he serves in the function of Prime Minister.
아까서 메도 뚜비도 아조 세그야레스
So merely named and merely designated, that makes a lot of sense when you think in terms of the Prime Minister.
다 데려마도 그런 니니치 단다테 뺑보 연바데 신세 연바데 저대요나
Yep.
메데 마도 빙아로니 코 통하기 전에 디노아샤 간도 용금도 요마도 와스
If Mark Carney was the Prime Minister from his own side, then before he was designated as Prime Minister and signed the papers to be Prime Minister, we would see Mark Carney and immediately the idea of Prime Minister would come into our mind. But that is not the case, right? That is not the case.
다 대세 좀 봐도 다 아마 다 개발 관계기 때 배치 침모도 위하레스
So this kind of example of merely named or merely designated, this is a way of thinking about emptiness that you'll see in two important schools of Buddhist philosophy, both the Chitta Mantra, the mind only, and the Madhyamika, the middle way schools.
더니 원 예모 코 손세된 저거 주사 매바데 안조 빼는 칭알을 빼죠 chimbo chi res.
Yes.
Chinga sene nganzo hot kata wa in oh chinga sa khore sene zuzu da yo pa chi siwo chi siwo pung was.
And we talked about how this idea of findability, of pinpointability of something really existing, it underpins the afflictions. We can also think of it using an object, for example, a mala, a rosary. When you see the mala that Geshe is holding in his hand, immediately the mind thinks mala, and it seems like there's sort of some sort of pinpointable, identifiable thing.
Oh, ta nyemu tapo kandis xiewa ina de cho kongdo nga ja kandis xiewa ina den muji ji tumbo nuwa de shabi ya res.
So then any kind of affliction that arises, whether it's attachment, whether it's anger, jealousy, and so forth, it arises connected with thinking that that thing is pinpointable or findable.
Oh, ta nyemu kandis ina so never shi mdu na ta kesore ma never shi yo na ta tanisa so no tu ya.
And so maybe you think, okay, the afflictions are not a problem. So if like attachment and anger are not things that disturb you, then you don't need to reflect on this more deeply. But if you do get disturbed by those emotions, then you want to start to think.
Oh, ta hot kata ni chinga zhe zu yo pa chi ta khore re ni yo sha na. Ko nginen zhe zu sam du wa siwo re du aspe.
So this example is especially clear because if you take that mala, which seems so kind of solid and identifiable, but if you remove one bead from that mala and hold up that bead, that pinpointable mala, where is it?
Oh, ta ten muji khoto tropo she sa ge yete li tere se tere chowa tere ta za yo sha na nonso tangi khoto tropo te ze kheta ji zo ro ya.
So if we do this with the person that we're angry with the person that we are mad at, we can think, where is the person that I'm so upset with? Is it their body? Is it their mind? Is it the feeling that they're manifesting right now? Where is that pinpointable person that made me angry?
Oh, ta zani raya me ba ji te ze chowa tropo le so ne ta nyemu zani raya me ba tel tin no yung anzo nyemu xie yo ma re se ta ta pa. Zani raya me ba tela.
Raya me pa de
Nyemu xie yo.
Shegyo mar sayo raya me pa samlo thangna then you mong yong to.
Oh, you te ta chen nyemu go ka ki zo tere.
So then if we think, I look for that findable, terrible person that I am angry with, but I cannot find them. I cannot identify them. That lack of findability immediately is going to prevent further anger, attachment, whatever affliction from arising.
Hakosarwas, oh, ta te kaze peta shuchir dosona ta dipi le ko rom me ba ka was.
And as the arising of the afflictions is undermined, then naturally the accumulation of negative karma ceases.
Oh, ta tumba ni tu sa te to le la ma was. Tumba ni to ke tela ta ri momo yung yo hanes. Ri chi tela no pen chen ra mani ki chi ra bi so ji yo hanes.
Yes. So, of course, realizing emptiness, this is something that is a little bit beyond the level we're talking about here. It's much more difficult. When we talk about people who have realized emptiness, different feelings arise for them. One person will have a feeling that they just found a precious jewel that they never knew was there.
Oh, to chowa ra ba tombe kala. Oh, ta te mi jise chembo ro was. Pena so sig ta no ne se na mo so so lo momba tropo chi na gu. Ka lo ja tro momba da gi chi no hot ka lo chi pa na ha le si wo cha ro was.
So it makes sense though, doesn't it? Like imagine that you were trapped somewhere and left completely in darkness. Then if you had like a torch or a candle or something and were able to immediately illuminate, all of those many years of darkness in an instance would be dispelled, right? And you would have a very hopeful feeling.
Oh, ta ramba ni pas ma ni tu ta de ge chowa slina tu ma ni tu cha so no yung ro was. Slina ti chowa ti yo hanes.
Yeah.
No ro bi chowa de ramba ni pas ma ne pa.
Niba sumpa yo mari nima to mento tambo norbuchi krasun and lochi pasun karisi.
Me no tanto tu ma ni tu ke ji was. No ro bi chowa de kale kol slina de ro was.
So then kind of after that initial unfolding, after that illumination, eventually you'll come to appreciate what you've achieved, which will be like the feeling of finding that jewel.
Oh, ta ya chembo chi le ramba tombo le pge shira tri pi to ba le pe kala ta ri chi le no lo pi ke chowa ji mi
But for some people, when that illumination happens, the first feeling can actually be a bit disconcerting, and they might even feel like they've lost a jewel. So for a few people that comes. And why do they have the feeling that they've lost something? Because with this understanding of emptiness, this I, this self that we've spent so many lifetimes sort of fixated on, right? We see it doesn't exist in the way it appears. So that I or that self, the way I thought that it existed as this pinpointable, identifiable thing, it doesn't actually exist in that way. So one time, Lama Tsongkhapa was giving a teaching about emptiness, and as a response, actually, one of the students kind of fell on his side onto the ground. So his friends were concerned. They thought he had fainted or he had some really serious illness or something. They were worried. Lama Tsongkhapa said, actually, don't disturb him. Just leave him be. And at that time, Lama Tsongkhapa knelt beside him and he explained to him how things arise in dependence upon each other, how all phenomena are dependent arising. Based on that, he was able to kind of stabilize and sit up again. So some people, when they realize emptiness in terms of the object of negation, which is inherent existence, it can feel like everything is sort of falling away. And some people get so scared, like to hold on to the edge of a table or something. Or hold on to the side of their robes. Yeah. So that is like a feeling of lost something. There's something that you hold on to, that you were holding on to, that you lost. And so His Holiness the Dalai Lama has explained that that's because that initial apprehension of emptiness, which is not that full realization of emptiness. It's that initial apprehension of coarser selflessness. Then it feels like there's no self there. So sometimes that feeling of loss or fear happens. So, but based on that initial apprehension or understanding, one engages and engages, and then one comes to that full and complete realization of emptiness. And so that's the reason why emptiness is so important to study and to practice, and also to develop our meditation, both analytical and placement. So the most powerful opponent to the afflictions is this wisdom of emptiness. The most powerful antidote to negative karma is emptiness. It is something very important. And so, and also this idea of emptiness and the profound thinking behind it, it is actually very rational and very scientific. And this is why many people working in the sciences are very interested in it. So some scientists, they find affinity with this mind-only idea, everything arises in connection with the mind. Some people find the Majjhimika, the middle way view, really interesting. And on the basis of that kind of initial encounter, actually, if they think about and reflect upon it further, hopefully there's an understanding that they can recognize the ultimate nature of reality. Dame
Dame,
dame kari dang jawa chibu.
Mimi konzo ta garseka nanzo.
Kari dang jawa la.
Nenyatsi nginado. Korosu kicheba ina nginazo level kanga akka to kijabonda wonzi kichusa yoba nuwa yo. Ina ngine chine tete raya madu.
So what? Yeah, I'll talk. So one scientist was saying, you know, a lot of the Buddhist understandings of emptiness are really related to cognitive science, because cognitive scientists think that consciousness, there has to be some identifiable starting point of that consciousness. But even with their scientific instruments, they still have not been able to identify it.
Ota tandi ta cheri pa ta tanda ina pita po ya po mo ti shawa nga shela yi chile. O tu mani la yu ta ga wa chike mo jes mo ji mo ya.
Yeah, so Geshe said because of that, then a lot of
Ala so yi
scientists
chi mo de.
so they're more open to ideas like past and future lifetimes, emptiness, and so forth.
Ota tandi chire so ne to ya de.
So before we end, are there any questions? Yes, yes.
Yeah, so the same person asking, if we truly want happiness, should we not spontaneously desire the happiness of others? Is this an idea of aspiration realized, or is it just another disguised grasping?
Okay, Nanso, is what a disguised grasping?
The desire for happiness of others. If we truly want happiness, should we not spontaneously desire the happiness of others? Is this actually an aspiration that can be realized, or is it disguised grasping?
So what is the disguised grasping? Wanting to be happy or achieving the happiness of others? I'm not clear.
Yeah, that's what we could say either here.
Yeah, no, is there any more? We'll ask that person to clarify. And yeah, is that it? Oh, okay. Any questions? Yeah, Tekili, go ahead.
Based on what you just spoke about.
Yeah.
The dropping away, you know, for some people when they're having their first moments of their life.
Yeah.
Of falling off the cushion. Or,
yeah.
It's all, is this something at the time of death, of the dissolution process of death? Or is anyone that helps another person will find when the birth element is dissolving first? The consciousness.
Yeah.
The grasping of the family.
Okay.
And it's best to hold on as someone to stabilize their fear when it's time.
Yeah.
When it's self-dissolving.
Mhm.
Or to allow them to use it.
Yeah, so so I'm going to say just for people from home. So Dekili was relating what Geshe was speaking about how when somebody has that initial realization of emptiness, it can feel like there's nothing to hold on to, right? And that can be so overwhelming that they might like fall over or something like that. And she was thinking like when you're working with people who are dying, often when we talk about the consciousness related to the earth element dissolving, right? It's like people can have like a similar experience of like the floor is kind of coming out from under them, right? Like there's nothing left to hold on to. So Dekili was wondering in that moment, should we kind of like reground them, help them come back, or is it better to kind of let them go into that experience? That's your question, right? Yeah.
Then also company tambo top duro. Then some marsai yores jiba yongya chika yores roa.
Di chikche yine nganso
Timrim rundurwa. Sa gi timrim kaprola roa. Some sorwadi double chik yores roa. Nguma zubuzusa yopadi roa. Chikyang zinmi tubia roa. Nepadi sa timpe kaprola nganso konso tets datung chik yores nga datung de la yus zubuzusa datung chik yores laugre. Yamena chikyang malabne konso timya di rangshin do na yakris.
Me thea teta ko phe shidu tanilak tani kondewa yokhina. Si yabotni peje tone te yagares.
Kare sikterna.
Ta me ta karse si yabosena. 다 손지도 현지선 봐서 미도 다들이도 걸어 저한테 지야.
Ale. Tene de gas chikia masona ya bore tua.
다때 간저 예와셔도 말 콜동반이는 저 첨부 요는도 다니었다 버려. 다 매나 다 노진 간저 질라게.
Yeah, so Geshe said that the difficulty here is that we might not know whether the person was somebody who meditated on emptiness or who had a kind of an interest or feeling in emptiness. In that case, you can make an argument that you don't do anything. But Geshe was saying that, like, in the case that you want to do something, like generally if the person is a Buddhist, we recommend saying the names of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas or saying some mantras or something like that. And that can be like a comforting thing in that experience.
그래서 어다 된다면지 이래. 그렇지나.
Yeah.
두머니를 저하지 첨부 여기는 다 걸어오는 게 있어서 도와주는 요소 들어왔어.
So for someone who's really familiar and has a strong feeling for emptiness, right, it's much better to let them experience that disillusion and meditate in that context. But it's sometimes hard to know, isn't it?
당한 좀 뭐세 담아를 고자 먹이네 두만이네 놓아지라고 집아지를 사용 알았어.
And this is the beauty at the time of death, without having to kind of exert ourselves really forcefully in meditation. There's an appearance of emptiness that is arising kind of spontaneously, right?
근데 단단히 걸어보게 좋아요. 그 전에 다 디디가를 뺄리라고 하지.
So if someone has, like, during their life developed feeling, meditated upon emptiness, then when that appearance is arising, it's a really good opportunity.
당한 좀 마도 버텨봐 놓지 소속 예지 쳐봐 놓지 다 좋아지게 되는 게 나버려.
They say it's like the meeting of a mother and son, right? The meditator in that moment of death, because you're meeting something that you're already very familiar with.
다 됐네를 다 동반이 또야 레라고. 고가 첨부 다 알아야 지내서 지내셔도.
So this is actually one of the easiest times to be able to recognize emptiness, to meditate upon it, and to realize it was during the death process.
예, 그래서.
So for other people that are still
Dene nangpa mayingenyana. Dene koronso
다들
lapa jana
어디
digres
가지?
robasana.
야.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yeah, you could hold on to their hand. Your Geshe said you reach out to them somehow.
야,
Yeah.
시야부터라
Or you say kind words to them. You just reassure them with touch that you're there, something like that. Yeah.
야. 뭐야 돼서 여기 도움은 되나?
So Geshe said if there's no questions, we'll close with a short chant to dedicate the merits.
전주
rinpoche maje banam jejurji jewa nyamba mebaya gone gondo bewa shu tongni tawa rinpoche maje banam jejurji jewa nyamba mebaya gone gondo bewa shu.
수서 드주 겨와야 보시 주다 야야 보시 소소 같이 뭐.
So bring forth, really important to bring forth a feeling of rejoicing in having accumulated merit and purified obscurations.
소소 다 겨와고 소바티 니팔라테 니파. 뭐게 뭐주 내요. 너는 로아리스 가와이네 소망이 마파셔니 som바스 모션 도야지.
So through the merits one has collected, we dedicate that all wars, diseases, and so forth may be completely cleared away, that any type of the 6 types of sentient beings who has been giving rise to evil minds has those replaced with minds of loving kindness. May the sun of happiness shine with equality on all sentient beings. So we'll pause there. Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody at home also. Take care.